Okay, several people were absent today, so I'm just going to go ahead and give a quick overview of the concepts and try to teach them because we did learn a new graph today. Okay, so let's jump right in. There was a video quiz tonight, video quiz 5.2, of course, since this is you guys were absent today, you have an extra day to do that, but that's up to you if you want to knock that out right away. All right, so oh, yeah, the Gibby that we had yesterday, we got a score for it. Did not do well, negative 29.5. While most people were not surprised, a few were very upset. So you got to miss that loud outburst in the classroom. So, all right, so today we went over a new curve. It's called the Phillips curve. Phillips curve. So the Phillips curve is all about demonstrating a very simple relationship. It's a relationship between inflation and unemployment. And this is an inverse relationship. And this is logical. You guys already know this economic logic, right? When GDP is rising, when aggregate demand is going to the right, for example, um, our price level goes up. So inflation's rising, that's bad. But because GDP is going up, unemployment is falling. They're hiring more people for that more production. So there's an inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment. When aggregate demand goes left and we fall in a recession, unemployment's rising, right? It's a recession. People are losing jobs. But at the same time, prices, get that other finger in here, prices are falling, right? There's an inverse relationship between those two. Okay, so we actually already know what the shape of an inverse relationship is because we have a demand curve that also shows an inverse relationship. Theirs is price of quantity, still an inverse relationship. Of course, it's a downward sloping curve. And so basically, if you remember that inverse relationship, you always remember what a Phillips curve looks like because it looks just like a demand curve. And then we'll go over why that is here in a second. All right. So in general, that's what we just said. There's an inverse relationship. So as you can see here, as you're running along here, you can see that the unemployment rate, when it goes up, the inflation rate goes down. It's practically a complete mirror image of the other. All right, so let's keep on rolling. Here we go. So here's a Phillips curve. We always put inflation on the y-axis, and that should make a little bit of sense. All of our prices are on the y-axis. Our price level is on the y-axis. And inflation has to do with changing what? You can't answer because you're at home watching this. Prices, change in price level. So it's still prices on that y-axis. Always, in this case, is the inflation or the changing of price level. And then our x-axis is unemployment. Also, that should make a little bit of sense to you, right? GDP is on our x-axis. When GDP rises, unemployment falls. So it's still kind of connected to the same axis. That would make some sense. Now, this inverse relationship always shows us, every point on this curve shows us a combination, the point where our economy is, where our unemployment rate is at a certain point, and our inflation is at a certain point. Right? So we can look at the red curve right here, or the red dot, red point, our economy is right there. So if our economy is there, our inflation rate is 5%, and our unemployment rate is 2%. So we have very high inflation, very low unemployment rate at this point. Right? I like to think of the Phillips curve like a slide. When you're at the top of the slide, right, it's danger, danger. You're getting too high, prices are rising too much, and you have an inflationary gap. At the top of the slide, it's an inflationary gap. So when the economy is overheating, there's going to be low unemployment rate and high inflation. You're going to be at the top of the slide because you keep on going up, prices keep on rising, so you're at the top. Then at the bottom of the slide, we have the opposite problem. Prices are very low, but you're at the bottom of the slide. Everything's over. Everything gets stagnant, right? You're just sitting there at the bottom. So unemployment rate's very, very high as a result of that. So when there's a recession, the unemployment rate is going to be very high, and the inflation rate is going to be very low, right? And so that's shown, demonstrated by at the bottom of the curve or along the curve to the right, for example. Because that shows high unemployment rate and low inflation rate. Okay, so that's your short run Phillips curve. Now, the Phillips curve can actually shift. We know that that inverse relationship isn't always happening, right? Specifically with cost push inflation. When aggregate supply shifts to the left, we know that that pushes up price level, but it also decreases GDP, so it pushes up unemployment. Both of them are going up. That's not the shape of a downward sloping short run Phillips curve. But how do we demonstrate that? Well, if both are going up from where we were before, we're going to show that as a shift, right? If we were at a point right here in the middle, here, let me draw it on here. If I was at a point here and stagflation occurred, I say, okay, well, inflation happened, so I'm going up there. And unemployment also happens, so I'm going up there, right? Both of those increase. That gets me to my new point out here. Well, how do I get to that point? I get to that point by shifting the short run Phillips curve. Okay, so if you're tracking with me, when aggregate demand shifts right, we're going to have a inflationary gap, and we're going to be at the top of the slide, right? So shifting right, let me get a different color here. At the top of the slide, we're going to be right here. When aggregate demand shifts left, we fall into a recessionary gap. Price level falls, so inflation is going down, and unemployment rises as GDP falls. So we're in a recessionary gap, as shown as being at the bottom of the slide or the bottom right. And then if aggregate supply shifts left, short run Phillips curve is going to shift right. If aggregate supply shifts right, short run Phillips curve is going to shift left. Okay, so it shifts in the opposite direction of aggregate supply. A shift in aggregate demand moves us along the curve, the Phillips curve. A shift in aggregate supply shifts the Phillips curve in the opposite direction. Now you don't have to remember those opposites and inverse relationships or whatever, although it might be helpful for you to memorize those. But if you know the logic and you just track, you're like, okay, inflation's going up, unemployment's going up, you'll always find that you're making the right plot of points and you're shifting the curve in the right way. It really is just a logic puzzle here. All right, let's keep rolling. Next up, long run Phillips curve. So if we have short run, we know we must have a long run. So what's happening in the long run? Well, we know in the long run on our ADAS model, we eventually wind up at full employment GDP. We also talked about the fact that at full employment GDP, we have a certain unemployment rate. We call that unemployment rate the natural rate of unemployment, which is normally somewhere between 4 and 5%, the natural rate of unemployment. So in other words, in the long run, we'll eventually be right there, long run average supply, at the full employment GDP, at the natural rate of unemployment. So if we take that idea and we apply it to our Phillips curve, well, then we're in the long run, we're going to be right here. The natural rate of unemployment is 5%. And we're going to draw a vertical line at long run Phillips curve. And just like the long run aggregate supply curve is the beacon where we want to be, the long run Phillips curve is also our beacon. We want to get back to 5% or full employment, the natural rate of unemployment. So oftentimes, if you're not given the percentage here, you'll see that labeled as NRU, or the natural rate of unemployment. Okay, so the LRPC is vertical at the natural rate of unemployment. All right, let's try some out. Here we go. So I'm going to give you a Phillips curve scenario here. Let me see if I can give myself a little bit of room. Yeah, I can draw it over here to the right. Okay, so we're going to draw 3 points here, and I'm going to try to draw this with my mouse. So it's not necessarily going to look pretty, but you can get these off of somebody's notes as well. All right, so we're going to have 3 economic points: point A, point B, point C. We see at point A, we have 15% inflation and 2% unemployment. You should be able to already identify what that is, that we have an inflationary gap. At point B, we have high unemployment and low inflation. That's probably going to be a recessionary gap. And point C, we're kind of right there in the middle. Now, it's important to note that I was given the natural rate of unemployment. That tells me right away where my long run Phillips curve is going to be. So I'm going to draw this right over here. I'm here and I'm here. I have inflation. I'm just going to put an I here. You can label it as inflation, or INF. INF is often how it's abbreviated. And then I have unemployment over here. I know that I have the long run Phillips curve as a vertical curve. That's going to be there every single time. So LRPC. And I know that's going to be at 5%. So right down here, I put in 5%. Now, I also know that my economy is in the short run, operates in the short run. So it's going to be on a short run Phillips curve that is downward sloping, like so. And I'm going to label that SRPC. So my economy always has to be on the short run Phillips curve, somewhere on the short run Phillips curve. All right, let me change color here. Let's see what happens with point A. Point A, it says we have 15% inflation. That's very high. And it says we have 2% unemployment. Well, I only have one reference point on the graph, and that's my natural rate of unemployment. If I have 2%, I know that's down here, 2%. Now, what do? Well, I know that this point has to be on my Phillips curve. So I just dash up until I hit my Phillips curve, and I call that point A. I dash over, and that is going to be, point A is going to be at 15%. Bada boom, bada bing, right? Now, that's point A. What kind of a gap do I have? Well, I'm at the top of the slide. I climb to the top of the slide. We have inflation. We have danger, right? This is bad. I have an inflationary gap. High unemployment rate, and my natural rate of unemployment is 5%. My current is 2%. So my unemployment rate is lower than it should be. That means I have an inflationary gap. Let's check out point B. I'll get a different color here for point B. Let's do some purple. Point B has a high unemployment rate of 12%, a low inflation rate. Now, I have a reference point here, 5%. I know my unemployment rate is going to be 12%, so I'm going to put that over here to the right, higher. Now, I know I have to be on the Phillips curve. Short run Phillips curve is what our economy is, actually. So I dash up until I hit that. I dash over, and that's going to give me my inflation rate. Sorry, my inflation rate is 3%. And I label this point B. So what's going on here? What do I have? Well, of course, I have a recessionary gap. My unemployment rate is higher than my natural rate of unemployment, and my inflation rate is low, right? So that's naturally what's happening there. Let me get one final color here. Go green. Next, it says my unemployment rate is 5%, my inflation rate is 7%. Now I go to my unemployment rate, and whoa, that's the same rate. What's going to happen there? Same as my natural rate of unemployment, so I have to be on the short run Phillips curve, so I must be at long run equilibrium. So that's my point, and then I dash over, and this is going to be 7%. So as we can see, this is where I want to be. In fact, when our economy self-corrects, that's where I end up again, right? Right there at point C. But temporarily, I can go to an inflationary gap, point A at the top of the slide, or a recessionary gap, point B at the bottom of the slide. Okay, hope that made some sense. Let's try out another one. Okay, next up, we're going to look at what stagflation looks like on the Phillips curve. So let me go ahead and draw this out for you. So again, I draw my X and Y axis. I have inflation, I have unemployment, and I always start with my long run Phillips curve. I got a little bendy there, sorry about that. LRPC. And my unemployment rate is, natural rate of unemployment is going to be 5%. So I know that that is where I am in the long run. So my long run Phillips curve is fixed vertically at that unemployment rate because there are no trade-offs between inflation and unemployment. In the long run, inflation goes up and down, but unemployment ends up right there at the natural rate of unemployment. Even if there's economic growth, the natural rate of unemployment doesn't change. So we won't be seeing that shift like we do in the ADAS model. Okay, then at my short run Phillips curve, it looks like this. I put in SRPC. Ooh, barely fit that in there. And I'm ready to go. All right. So now I only have one reference, so I'm always going to look at my unemployment rate first. So point A, because my unemployment rate is at 5%. What's going on there? Well, that's the same as my natural rate of unemployment. That means my economy must be right now exactly where I want it to be, right? I'm at full employment GDP. I'm at the triple intersection on the ADAS model. I'm a point on the curve of the production possibilities curve. I'm at the peak of the business cycle, right? It's perfect. So I dash over, and I know my inflation rate is 6% because they give it to me. So now, what's going to happen next? Well, my inflation rate is 11%, so I know that's going to be way up here. That's going up. And my unemployment is going to be at 12%, so that's way over here. That's also going up. So I dash up, I dash over, and I've got this point way out here for point B. What happened? Unemployment rate went up, inflation rate went up. Well, of course, this is stagflation. I have inflation, I have unemployment, stagnant economy, it's bad. That means aggregate supply has shifted left. So how do I show that change here? I simply shift my short run Phillips curve. It's a terrible shift. I shift my short run Phillips curve to the right, and I call it SRPC2. So again, let the plotted point lead the way. If I know inflation went up and unemployment went up, I know I'm going to have to move a point out here. If it's out in the ether, that means there must have been a shift to make that occur, and I make that shift happen. Okay, that's stagflation. Let's try another one. Got 4 of these, so only 2 more to go. All right, next up, see if you can do this yourself. Pause the video and try to draw these 3 points, and I'll just sit here while you do it. Okay, I assume that you paused it for longer than I made those facial expressions. So hopefully you got a graph. If you didn't pause it, there's no way for me to know. So let's just move on. I'm going to go ahead and draw the bones of this, and then we'll jump in. So again, we're talking about our Phillips curve. So we've got our inflation right here. Ooh, getting a little sloppy here. Inflation, we've got our unemployment over here. We've got my long run Phillips curve right here, LRPC. And that's always going to be at the natural rate, which they tell me is 4%. That's a little different. So this is going to be 4% right here. I then draw my short run Phillips curve because I know that is actually indicating where my economy is at any point in time. And I'm ready to go. So let's jump in. Let's look at point A. Point A says I'm at an unemployment rate of 4%, inflation rate of 6%. 4%, that means I must be currently exactly where I want to be, right? So I dash over, I'm at that equilibrium, and my inflation rate is 6%. Bada boom, bada bing. That's point A. Then point B, I have something happening. I have the inflation rate going up to 8% and the unemployment rate's down to 2. So I come over here, this is 2%, lower unemployment rate. Dash up until I hit the curve. I dash over, and this is going to be 8%. So what's happened? What kind of a gap do I have for point B? I have an inflationary gap. I'm going up the slide, right? Causing inflation to happen, causing danger, inflationary gap. Now what happens? Well, what happens next is my inflation rate goes up to 10%. My unemployment rate goes up to 4%. They're moving in the same direction. It's not moving along the curve anymore. What's going on? Well, I can just plot my point and figure it out. So my point is 10% right here. Inflation has gone up even more. And my unemployment rate is 4%. So I'm back at the natural rate of unemployment. That's my point C. Now, this can't be out there in the ether, right? It can't just be a point in the long run. We don't exist in the long run. We exist in the short run. So how do I get there? Of course, that is caused by a shift of the short run Phillips curve. So we call this SRPC2. We just shifted to the right. And what we've just seen is the economy go into an inflationary gap and then self-correct, right? So the economy went into an inflationary gap, and then because aggregate demand shifted right, and then in the long run, costs went up, aggregate supply shifted left to fix our economy, causing GDP fall. So unemployment rates rose and inflation rates rose back to full employment GDP. So with aggregate supply shifts left, the short run Phillips curve shifts right, and we're back to where we want to be. Self-correction of our economy. All right, let's try one more. All right, see if you can do this. Again, I will pause. Okay, see how you do. Let's dive right in. I'm going to draw the bones of this. Da, da, da. We have inflation. We have unemployment. Draw on our long run Phillips curve, LRPC. We draw on our short run Phillips curve, SRPC. And now we're ready to go. So I jump over here and I look at my first point. Point A is going to be 5% unemployment, 7% inflation. I know my natural rate of unemployment is 5%, so I can go ahead and label that right here at the long run because I know I'm always going to end up there. If currently my unemployment rate is 5%, my inflation is 7, is my first point, it must be right here at equilibrium. I dash over, I get my inflation rate, which is 7%, and that's point A. Not so bad. Point B. Point B, my inflation rate is 4%. My unemployment rate's 10. What's happened? Well, I come down here and I plot my point. I got 10% right here, and I dash up until I hit the curve. So now I have to be on the curve. I dash over, and my second point is 4%. Right? And you can always just check your numbers and make sure, does that make sense? Did I make the correct change? Right? Is 10% greater than 5%, for example? So in this case, yes, I made the right change. And what's going on? I have a recessionary gap. Now, you know a recessionary gap is caused by average demand shifting to the left. Price level fell, inflation fell. GDP rose, so unemployment, or I'm sorry, price level fell, GDP fell as well. And so when GDP fell, unemployment rose as a result of that, causing this recession. Now, what fixes it? Well, we know in the long run, the costs will go down, which will shift aggregate supply to the right, fixing our economy. So we're going to see the fix right here. Point C, when that happens, my price level falls even more. Average supply shift to right. Price level is going all the way down at 2% here, right? But my unemployment rate is going back to 5%. So if I dash it over, it's a point right here on the long run Phillips curve. How did I get there? Well, of course, that had to be a shift. SRPC2. Right? When average supply shifts right to fix our economy, the short run Phillips curve shifts left, getting us back to the natural rate of unemployment, going from A to B to C. Okay, that's the Phillips curve in a nutshell. This is what the Phillips curve actually looks like in life. It's kind of the scatter plot all over the place. But it's not really this perfect inverse relationship that we always talk about. So generally speaking, economists don't lean so heavily on the short run Phillips curve. They lean more on the ADAS model. They just use this as a demonstration of the theory of unemployment versus inflation rates. All right, so that's all you need right now. This is the second most important graph you need for macroeconomics. So definitely make sure that you got a handle on this. We're going to do some more practice in class tomorrow, and you should be A-okay. Hope the field trip was amazing.